evening, everybody. Thank you very much for asking me to come and chat. So the bio bit, okay, I feel slightly embarrassed, but I'll go through it fairly briskly. So, well, in fact, much of this started back in the early 80s when I was 13, when my dad bought me a ZX80 made by Clive Sinclair. So that was a computer with what 1K of RAM and 4K of ROM, and I taught myself to program using that. And there I set the seeds for what was to come, so to speak. But so I trained in medicine at St George's, qualified in 1991. I then was an SHO at Guy's and Lewisham for a little bit. Then I was a registrar at Hammersmith. I did my PhD in immunopathology at Hammersmith. And between there and Charing Cross, spent almost 9 years there before I came to Addenbrooke's in 2003. And so, I came here, first of all, as a university appointment because Ken Smith at that time had I think it was a welcome career leave grant. So my post was funded by that to allow Ken go off and do better and greater things. And then I moved over to become an NHS consultant at the beginning of 2008. And obviously, all the way through my sort of teenage years and university, and in fact, part of my PhD was around mathematical modeling of immune cells, and I wrote some software there to help with that computational biology. And then when I came to Addenbrooke's, I started looking at the work that we were doing around the transplant system. And in those days there was nothing at all for anybody, and people were sort of trying to create their own things. And so I worked with Paul Jones in the transplant team, and we created a system that went from being a single access database to being a major system running on SQL Server with multiple terminal servers doing the presentation layer, which then in the end came to underpin solid organ transplantation for basically much of the east of England, for certainly both for kidney and liver transplants, and then pancreas transplants as we started doing them. So by about 2010, Jag Alawalia, who was the medical director at that time, came to me and said, "You seem to know something about computers. Will you help us with various small projects?" And then around 2010, Dame Mary Archer, who was the chairman at the time, sent an email, partly prompted by a clinical safety incident in the hospital where we had misprescribed cotrimoxazole to a patient who was on methotrexate, and this lady unfortunately went on to die. And I think Mary Archer's email was simply one line, which is, "What would it take to implement a hospital-wide electronic medical record?" And things then more or less exploded from there, really, in as much as I got drawn into what became the strategic outline case for a hospital medical record system. That then went to an outline business case, and eventually ended up as an EU procurement tender in 2011. We chose our preferred bidders in 2012. We had a year of assurance from all sorts of people, including the regulators, Monitor, as was, and others. And we signed the contracts with Epic and Hewlett-Packard in the spring of 2013. And everything's just sort of grown and grown since then, really. So I sort of started off back in 2010 doing one session a week, and it's ended up now as, in effect, being my full-time job, although I still do. I gave up doing any outpatient work in about 2014. So since 2015, I've just been doing inpatient work. So I do 3 months a year scattered throughout the year of general nephrology, renal transplant, general medicine, and some vasculitis work. And in fact, just come off 2 weeks of general nephrology and vasculitis last week and the week before, which I still enjoy, and which I insist upon doing on the basis that A, fundamentally I always wanted to be a doctor, B, I enjoy looking after patients, and also using the systems that you help to put in place, I think, is a good thing for everybody. It helps to keep you grounded in a sense of normality, and it also helps you to prioritize things. I won't say much, but a proportion of my life is spent on calls with people who sometimes are very passionate, shall we say, about some very, very small things, which fundamentally are, it's not that they're unimportant, but when you measure them against the greater scheme of things and the things that we're trying to do, and in particular, the things that we all want to do that are, if you like, real game changers for patient care, and recognizing that we have limited resource, I think it's really important to keep bringing it back to what is actually meaningfully going to help the patient, because otherwise you can spend all your life fine-tuning a screen here, fine-tuning a screen there, but actually you're not really making a difference. So that's about me. And then since then, I've sort of gone on to do a few other things. So as well as obviously the work I do at CUH, a couple of things that I sort of do in addition to that. So I'm the medical director of something called Patient View, which was a renal association patient portal system that grew up over the years. I'm the vice chairman of the National Professional Record Standards Body, which is the body that's working on standardized forms of documentation at a clinical level, so that when you overlay that clinical standardization on top of technical standardization, you can have proper interoperable clinical records. And also with all the work that's going on here at Cambridge, when health data research started about 5 years ago, which was the national initiative funded by the 20 major research donors, Cambridge set up a substantive site. John Dinesh is the site director, and then I'm one of the associate site directors here for the hospital, and then there are associate site directors across the EBI and the Sanger Institute as well. So a few other bits, but all broadly based around the theme of clinical informatics. So what I was planning to do today, rather than just talk at you for hours and hours, I was going to give you about sort of 5 to 10 minutes on where we are as a hospital at an operational level, and then about 5 to 10 minutes on where we're trying to get to on a research level, and then really throw the conversation open for questions and conversation, in part so that I get to learn a little bit more about the things that are really important to you guys, and in part so that you're asking questions for the things that are also important to you, rather than me just talking about things that are hopefully interesting but slightly more peripheral. So so operationally, so where are we? So if I'm going to start with the technical side of things first of all. So during I mean, obviously COVID has brought a huge amount of change to everybody. The trust as a whole took the opportunity to do a number of things to really strengthen the underlying platform, some of which were funded by COVID money, but some of which in fact came out of the transition as we moved away from our previous infrastructure provider, which was DXC, and we moved on to what was originally a company called Novosco. So just Novosco started off as a Northern Ireland private company. About a year later, after we moved over to them, they were bought out by a German company called Cancom, and Cancom have now sold that part of their business to Telefonica, into the technical arm of Telefonica called Telefonica Tech as of August of this year. So obviously many of you will be familiar with Telefonica as the provider of the O2 mobile phone network in the UK. So we'd already planned a lot of work with Telefonica, but we also took the opportunity with COVID, in part supported by COVID funding, to strengthen some underpinnings. So where we are on the positive side is we've massively bolstered the core network, and the Wi-Fi, the last bits of the Wi-Fi rollout are due to finish around about May or so of next year. And in terms of that, we will have gone from just over 1,300 wireless access points around the campus to over 3,300. So we've not quite trebled it, but we've increased the density of Wi-Fi coverage and the scope of Wi-Fi coverage. And the new radio units that have gone in are able to support more devices at any one time than the previous ones. The bandwidth to the outside world has been increased tenfold on both the core hospital network, but also on the new staff Wi-Fi that's going in, and we're about to increase the patient Wi-Fi capability tenfold as well, so that A, everybody gets a good experience, we hope, and B, there's plenty of capacity for all of the things that we want to do in the future. And equipment-wise, we are still, so the trust actually is under an has had warning of an enforcement notice under the national infrastructure legislation. So under that legislation, we are we're classed as an essential infrastructure for the country. And because we still have some Windows 7 computers left, only about 350 around the estate, we've been told if we don't hurry up and get rid of them, then we'll be put under this national enforcement notice. We do need to be mindful collectively of the cyber risks that the hospital runs. So to give you a scale of an idea of the scale, every month there are now approximately 300,000 discrete cyber attacks against the hospital that we are seeing and are protecting you all from on a daily basis. In the nicest possible way, I'm afraid that the weakest link are still all of us as individuals clicking on things that we shouldn't click on. So please, can I encourage you to be a little thoughtful before you click on links? But equally, I recognize that sometimes it's really quite hard to tell good things from bad things. And so it's my job and the job of the team behind me to make sure that if you do something by mistake, it doesn't bring the entire network down. And we are in a very different position now compared to where we used to be, because we have live clinical data traversing our network hundreds of thousands of times a day. Blood sugar data from blood sugar machines, arterial gas data, obviously all of your work. If we suffer a major outage or a ransomware attack, it could have really significant connotations for us, and much more than when we were just a paper-based hospital. Anyway, we're working on removing all of this legacy kit. Sometimes, and don't think it really applies to yourselves, but particularly in pathology where they have some analyzers, there are some analyzers that will only work still with either Windows 7 or in some cases Windows XP computers. So there's a lot of national pressure being applied to those manufacturers to say you need to really get on and modernize your stuff. And also all manufacturers now are having national pressure from the government to improve the cyber security of some of the PCs that are embedded in kit. So I suspect in most of your ultrasound machines, but certainly, for example, in the echocardiography machines, there will be embedded versions of Windows. And historically, many of those manufacturers have not really spent a lot of time thinking about cybersecurity, but those things are now coming under this sort of purview. So where are we trying to get to? So we've just done a major upgrade of Epic in early November, and it was the biggest upgrade that Epic had ever done. We had got behind because of infrastructure reasons, but happily now we're catching up. We're planning a further upgrade in the second half of next year, which will take us from the current November 20 release of Epic to the February 22 release of Epic. So at that point, we'll in essence be current and we'll be consistent with all of the other UK Epic sites. And at the moment, Epic is live in Great Ormond Street, UCLH in London, and in Royal Devon and Exeter. Great Ormond Street have just signed with the Royal Marsden, and so the Royal Marsden will be going live with Epic, I think in 2023, and they will be joining the Great Ormond Street instance. Frimley Park Hospitals, a group of hospitals in the southwest of London, are going live with Epic next year. The whole of Northern Ireland is going live with Epic, I think starting towards the end of next year. And then essentially all of Greater Manchester will be going live with Epic as well, apart from Salford Hospital. And 2023, Guy's and St Thomas's, followed by King's, will be going live with Epic as well. So there's lots happening, but it's good from our perspective to have that wider Epic community growing. We nationally, there's a move towards moving everybody onto, in effect, Office 365 for Microsoft. That's being termed N365. And we're aiming to start email migration for everybody in the spring, following on with the more classical Office applications. And then after that, there will be, we start to make available, Microsoft Teams will come online at the same time as the email. Then there'll be the Office applications. And then there are a few other things, other tools that others may be aware of. But for example, a sort of Twitter-like messaging thing called Yammer that can be used to sort of canvass opinions and get sort of quick responses from people. And we'll be looking to grow that tool set over time. Realistically, some of this will run into through all of next year into 2023. But the core bits we really want to get on with and deliver them for you next year. At a clinical level within the hospital, there's a national mandate that says we should get rid of all of our pagers, both internal and long range, technically by the end of this year. So we're not going to hit that metric, but we have deployed a tool within Epic called Secure Chat. We will be undertaking a process in the early part of next year to remove all of the internal and long range pages, all of the non-emergency ones, leaving just the cardiac arrest ones, and we'll move everybody onto Secure Chat. So Secure Chat is in effect an Epic form of WhatsApp, but it works both on-site and off-site. It works, there's a mobile app, it will work on the desktop version of Epic. It will be available for doctors, nurses, and anybody in the hospital, including non-clinical people and other people who hitherto haven't used Epic, will be able to use that messaging system. You'll be able to create groups. There will be out of office messages. There will be, it will tell you whether or not your message is being read by others. And lots of people, we're seeing it being used already in excess of 10,000 times a month for clinical messaging. In the longer run, and once we perhaps have a little bit of time, it will offer a lot of capability. So it will, for example, be possible for automatic messages to be sent out in response to certain things. So for example, in radiology, where you mark an alert on a record, we will be able to program the system so that a message not only goes in the chart for when a doctor logs in, but will proactively go out to the consultant who's responsible for that patient over Secure Chat, or whatever we agree operationally is the right way to route those messages. So it gives you opportunities like that. Other things more pertinent to radiology are, there's a paper that went to investment committee, in fact, this week. It's going to management executive next week, which if approved will bring us up to date with our voice recognition technology. So we're going to be moving away, hopefully, from a network-based Dragon solution to a much more modern cloud-based solution, which will work both, again, on-site, off-site. You'll be able to use headsets or microphones, but you'll also be able to use your mobile phone with an app. So for example, if you're reporting from home and it suits you, you can just dictate into your mobile phone, it will come up in the Epic in real time. I know obviously yourselves are very big users of voice recognition, but for other users around the hospital, this will be a new thing. We're planning to get an enterprise license that will cover somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 users. Not only does it have a capability, so for people like me, if I'm dictating a clinic letter and I say patient has heart failure or pneumonia, for example, on the screen as I'm typing, the system will be noticing what I'm typing and will be extracting and considering the text that I'm saying. So it has the opportunity to say, Dr. Chaudhry, you've talked about all sorts of things. We think this patient might have sepsis. Is that what you mean? It will say, you've talked about heart failure. Do you mean chronic or acute? Do you mean diastolic, systolic? I can choose to ignore those. These are not messages that will interrupt my flow, but they're things that I can take advantage of if I want to. And it will also have the ability to take those structured elements out of the text, highlight them to me, and then, for example, add them onto the problem list and other areas in Epic, which will increase our use of structured, discrete data, which then becomes amenable for research, service evaluation, audit, etc., etc. And the other work that I'm mindful of for next year, particularly for radiology, is around the work that was bid for earlier this year as part of the diagnostics bid, which is a product by a company called MedCurrent. And I know that Tilak and I think Helen have been looking at that, is around, it's a form of radiology decision support, and it's based upon the Royal College of Radiology guidelines that I know Ashley's had significant contributions to, whereby when end users like me are placing an order, in real time, the system will take certain characteristics and properties from the patient plus what I'm ordering, and will then feed it into this machine learning algorithm, which will then come back in real time to me and say, actually, although you're ordering a CT scan, you don't really want a CT scan. What you really need is an MRI scan, and we're swapping out the order for you. Press the button and the system will then order the right sort of thing, will help me to order the right test. And I understand as well that at the end of the month or after a given period of time, it will give me some feedback to say, Dr. Chaudhry, your radiology ordering skills are ranked sort of 7 out of 10, and you need to do better, or you're doing very well, or what have you. So there's an element of education in there. There's an element of trying to get the right investigation at the first time. When used in other centres, there's substantial evidence that it reduces the amount of shall we say, perhaps inappropriate investigations. It saves time for yourselves in trying to avoid having to re-protocol stuff, etc., etc. So we think that will be a really positive thing. So lots happening on the operational side. If I move over to the research side, so as many of you will, well, some of you may know, one of the things that is a real challenge for us is that all of the work that we've done around the infrastructure was really written in a procurement back in 2016. So by the time that procurement gets transacted, you go out to tender, you get everybody in place, you sign the contracts, you deliver it, etc., etc. We're now 5 years later, but actually technically only 2 years into the contract. And the reality is our needs have evolved and moved on substantially since when the procurement was originally written. So a lot of what we have works really well, and it particularly works pretty well for running a hospital in the very classical sense, but it isn't really now working for some of the things that you need around flexibility and agility, particularly around research, and particularly now as we move into this era of a lot more machine learning type approaches. So with the help of Miles Parks, we secured some funding on the BRC side to set up something called an Azure landing zone. So this is if you like, it's a foundational platform within Microsoft Azure cloud space that is connected with 2 high-speed redundant connections to the trust, and which has appropriate firewall perimeters and sort of intrusion detection and etc., etc., around the perimeter. So in effect, it becomes an extension of the trust's network, but in Azure space. And it then becomes amenable to all of the capability that Microsoft Azure brings. So the opportunity to stand up virtual machines, to do serverless computing, storage, pipelines, all sorts of things. What we're working to do is to put in place all of the information governance around that, so that any project that gets undertaken within that area, if you like, the first 80% of all of the information governance work is already done and dusted and approved by the trust, so that any specific project that comes in has only got, if you like, a thin layer of information governance review that needs to happen, so to streamline that process, but also then to get to a place whereby, so for example, for a radiology project, you might come along and say, we need 2 or 3 servers, we want Martin Graves to administer them, and we can say to you, here you go, we're giving you permission in a controlled way to create whatever servers that you want. The only requirement is that you promise to pay for the Microsoft resources that you consume, but it will sit within that secure space. You can be the administrators of that. As long as you comply with the trust rules and regulations, we're not going to interfere, and let you get on with the flexibility and the agility that you need. And if you only need those servers for, let's say, a year, you run them for a year, you manage them yourselves within that framework, you switch them off after a year, there are no more costs. So it brings a lot more opportunity. And the initial project that's gone in there is Raj Jenner's Inner Eye project, based around the work that he's been doing with Microsoft and looking at CT scans and others to decide around decision support tools around radiotherapy, and that sort of we've used that as the exemplar project. So we're only really in the starting phase of this, but we've, the technical bit is in place. We're working on the governance bit, and then we will be working with you. We know that you have a need for this. We want to be using yourselves as sort of one of the prototypic teams to start working with this. And we recognize that some of the configuration and capability will evolve, and we will have helped to evolve that in conjunction with the use cases that you present. But building on that then is, so you've got a tool set that allows you to do this, but where are you going to get your data from? And one of the challenges that we've had historically is that we have a very, should we say, we're a very lean central reporting team. We've got a cohort of staff who are exceptionally skilled and highly trained in Epic, but the reality is there are only a handful of them, and we do need to invest in them. Now, the trust, you may have seen, recently signed a deal with a company called SenSign, who are a company that work with many NHS trusts to do basically research analyses that have been commissioned by all sorts of people, sometimes academic hospital institutions, sometimes pharmaceutical companies, all sorts of things. And an example of that is some work that Chelsea and Westminster started off. They gathered up data from multiple hospitals, and they've turned that into an algorithm around the deteriorating patient. Anyway, we are now going to be contributing data to that group. But one of the reasons why that's important is because this is a very equitable process within the NHS. The hospital gets some shares in that company. It will get a proportion of any benefits that come from any algorithms that are developed, but it also brings us some resource to allow us to grow the central team. Now, the aim of growing the central team is not so that we've just got more people to do the analyses for you, but actually what we're planning to do is to move to a position where we have a set of clean and curated data streams that you can then connect your projects to. So at a very basic level, we'd have a data stream, say, for patient diagnoses, and a data stream for results, a data stream perhaps for radiology results, a data stream for medication, a data stream for other properties and items within the patient notes. And then as projects come along and they get approval from trust R&D and information governance or whatever is needed, those groups will be issued with a digital token, and that token will in effect describe the scope and scale of the data that they're entitled to access. And then programmatically, you'll be able to point that digital token and your systems at our endpoint, and it will say, Dr. Chaudhry is in renal and he's entitled to identifiable data from patients in 2019 who have a diagnosis of membranous nephropathy. Or Professor Gilbert's a radiologist and she wants all of the anonymized radiology from the last 5 years from the trust, and this is what she can have. And that way, we do two things. One is we make your life much easier because you can take the data that you're entitled to as frequently or intermittently as you see fit, and you can build up that longitudinal record as you want. We're only giving you what you're entitled to see, whether it's identifiable, anonymized, etc. And that frees up time in the central team to work on those types of queries that initially that have to be handcrafted. But once they're handcrafted and they're validated as being accurate, then they will themselves get turned into yet another automated API that somebody can plug their tool set into. So we want to, over time, build a series of APIs that help people to get their data. And then the last bit that I really want to talk about before stopping for questions is there's a return limb to that, in as much as, so you get all your data, you run it through, you develop all your machine learning algorithms and all of that sort of stuff. At some point, it's got to come back to help look after the patient. So if you think that there's the return limb that comes back, well, sometimes that return limb may need to come back to you as radiologists. Sometimes that may need to come back to me as an end user in the clinic. So there are already tool sets within Epic that allow us to take the output of machine learning algorithms, or in fact, to take some of the algorithms, not necessarily radiology, but other types of algorithms, if they can be exported from something like R using a language called PMML, sort of predictive modeling markup language, and actually embed both the algorithm and, more importantly, the result of the analysis into Epic so that it shows to the right clinician at the right time in the workflow. So, you know, in a way, I gave you the example before of that radiology decision support, which will take my order and some patient characteristics, go off and then come back and tell me in real time, no, you're placing the wrong order. But we might get to a position where the system is basically taking some patient characteristics and the radiology information from PACS, going off and coming back and saying, actually, this chest X-ray or whatever it is, or this CT scan shows these conditions, and you need to think about that now. So there is a return limb. We do need to work on that. We haven't, as a trust yet, invested any effort in training people to be able to make use of that capability, but it is something that will come, because there more than just yourselves. I was talking with the neurologists last week around some work to do with the memory clinic, and all sorts of clinics are developing these sorts of tools where they want to start to influence clinician behavior in real time, and we need to be looking at that. So I'm going to stop there. I've spoken to you for about 25 minutes or so. I hope that gives you a flavour of the sorts of things that we're looking to do. I'm very happy to take questions and dive into some of the elements in more detail.
Afzal, that was fantastic. That was a great summary of all the things that have been going on and are going to be going on, and I suspect all of us have learned quite a lot about the planning going forward and what the infrastructure in our hospital is going to be looking like. So it's hugely useful for us to do that. The people on this call are clinicians who are managing patients, who are interacting with the other specialties and things. So we're all kind of EPIC users and PACS users and RIS users. And so it is an amazing system. And thankfully, in the most recent upgrade of EPIC wasn't too hard a change for those of us who are just using it on a kind of day-to-day basis. It was relatively straightforward. Okay, slightly different look for things, but you know, you can find your way around it pretty quickly, which is always a relief. Let me tell you, when the systems change. So one of the huge projects that we were involved with during COVID was the one that Willem Ouwehand led. Yes. In terms of creating this mirror image anonymized copy of the EPIC data set. And I mean, I actually learned a huge amount doing that project with them, in that which bits of the hospital record were not linked to the EPIC. So obviously the images are not part of EPIC. Some of the blood results, in fact, many of the blood results that are done are not part of EPIC. And so that was very interesting to then see how we then link them back up again when we were creating this kind of research COVID data set for doing research on. And of course, it makes it a fabulous, the act of creating that mirror image data set created this wonderful playground, if you like, for people to go in and start writing software in terms of being able to find information or being able to start building algorithms. Because I think, well, I'm sure it's increased from now, but a few months ago he said there was like 400,000 patient records sitting on it, which is incredible. And he said that, you know, lovely Vince is kind of updates that database, the mirror image database, twice a week, which is just phenomenal when you think about it in terms of, you know, keeping it up to date and things. We're particularly interested in things like, so many of us have been involved in the radiology guidelines, which were developed, oh gosh, now probably the RCR guideline about 20 years ago, which then became iRefer and have now been adopted by several different companies. But it's great that we're going to be incorporating it into the EPIC system, so that when clinicians are ordering, they can find out firsthand it's not appropriate or whatever. But what we have found in the past, and the people who are doing kind of acute on call will know firsthand, is that if they're not allowed to order something because the words don't fit, they will change the words irrespective of what's wrong with the patient. And so, you know, you clinicians are very smart at getting what you want.
Oh, yes.
So I mean, that's good. But what the lovely thing is, what it sounds like, is that you will then get feedback. So individual consultants will get feedback on the number of patients that they're ordering, if they're a high referrer or a low referrer. and certainly, sorry, that's my phone, I'm just ignoring. But the one of the things that we did a long while ago was looking at knee referrals for plain X-ray and for back pain. And we did a big study with feedback to the GPs. And we found that, in fact, with targeted feedback for these two different conditions, we could compare it practice by practice, we could compare it by individual GPs, and they were quite shocked that they were actually a much higher referrer or lower referrer, and we could give them the targeted messages which said, you know, in this particular condition, do not do X, Y, Z. So I'm very confident that this will be effective for a number of different conditions, and it will be hugely useful to look and see what does help, because as you know, I'm sure you know, our on-call inpatient work is just overwhelming at the moment, and we just so struggle to keep up with it. So timely, appropriate requests will help our delivery of our service hugely. Do other people want to put their cameras on? And I see there's a number of people who are working in AI and using data. So Evis is on, Evis Sala, Jonathan Weir-McCall's been looking at different data sets in Papworth.
So just whilst people are thinking, a couple of things to say. One of the things that we did do when we first implemented Epic was, as we retired many of the old systems, we took the opportunity to archive that data into and make that available so that it is still available for research. So we actually have data going back about 20 years on a total of about just over 4 million patients.
Wow.
And so not a complete data set on everybody, but so for example, everything that was in the old Meditech system for pathology is archived as structured data. All of the historical EMR system that currently has around about 11 million documents, all of which my ultimate aim is to put them through some form of natural language processing and extract the structured data from them, because many of those documents are, you know, things like echoes, gastroscopy, clinic letters, all sorts of things that have data on some very well-defined but relatively unusual cohorts of special patients who come to our hospital for specialist reasons that perhaps aren't represented elsewhere in the country even. So there's a lot of, you know, we are literally only just scratching the surface of all of this. And you're right, which is one of the things we found with Willem's work was, yes, we've got all of the standard blood tests in Epic. So all of the stuff that the labs produce feeds into Epic in almost every case. But what we found with hematology was that the hematology analyzers produce a whole load of additional and analytical metrics that never get reported and they're never fed back to any clinician, but which themselves still have meaningful value when you put them into that sort of machine learning bucket and say, what do these other analytical values mean? And you know, Willem, I'm sure will tell you, but they found all sorts of signals in this, not only the regular data sets, but in these other but these other additional data sets that we needed to find a methodology for bringing them out of the analyzers and into that research field.
Yeah, I completely agree. Kind of a very exciting area. I know Willem's, very, and I think he's already signed a contract with a company overseas to start looking at that, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if Evis is kind of on the line at this point in time. She's certainly at the meeting. Evis has done a huge amount of work with GE Healthcare, yes, in terms of developing their system, and she's been working with Carola Bibi and Sean
yes,
at Math Department in terms of doing kind of end-to-end, yep, machine learning from the initial acquisition of images and things. And Evis, I don't know if you want to kind of comment on in terms of how that links into some of the developments that Afzal has been talking about and how we best utilize that Epic record.
So, I think there are several things we're working as part of that. Afzal has been really wonderful. Thank you so much. And Martin has been facilitating that to actually put machines like Intel to do some of the COVID work to add to your work that you've been doing, Fiona, on the COVID front. But on the cancer work with GE, it's going to be really creating a decision support tool, and actually then an MDT tool, which will be basically a visualizer after you aggregate and integrate the data. So we'll feed in not only the standard of care that is in EPIC, but will be an extra layer of fitting in the radiomics, the parameters, obviously automatic segmentation. So it will be the next level of complexity. I'm so sorry, Afzal, but I think, that will be maybe the way forward to get that extra,
No, indeed. And so I met with,
edge.
So Sue Broster and I met with Ken Seaman and Richard Gilbertson a week or two back. And Ken's team have been sending me the stuff around the GE infrastructure and things. So we're planning more conversations, and I'm going to join part of that sort of project group and so on, to make sure that we can, being entirely transparent, the trust is limited by the resource that it has, but the reality is there is some resource, and it's a question about prioritization. My view of this is that these are the things that only we can do with the capability that we have, certainly in the UK, and we should be pushing forward with these things, and we should be supporting this work. So I'm very, very supportive of really helping to push this along as promptly as we can to help you in the work that we do, because otherwise, at the end of the day, what we don't want to have is just if you like, a faster system that brings utility in its own right, but we should be pushing these boundaries, if you like.
No, absolutely. And I think the good thing about that collaboration is that when we set the budget, it's actually support for precisely what you're, if you don't know, then that maybe I give you the good news that, there is either in-kind equivalent or actually really money to actually hire people to work, that will work with you and Vincent Co to actually do that part of data curation in EPIC, which is really key.
Yeah, no, indeed.
Along with the clinical fellows that we're going to hire, which also provide some support for that, obviously. So I think,
I think it's a really, really exciting area. Jonathan, do you want to come in, because you've obviously got experience of Papworth and the kind of parallel system that's there in terms of the IT infrastructure and linking to the PAC system there. I can't remember the name of it. Apologies. We talked so much about it during the pandemic last year.
So for my sins, I'm stuck with Lorenzo, and it's fantastic hearing Afzal speak and the incredible work that's been done in Addenbrooke's on EPIC, because I think it's just truly a step above, and it's fantastic to see how that's been leveraged over the COVID period, because we've certainly had challenges leveraging the Papworth data to the same extent. We've had far more success actually, not in our main electronic health records, but in our ITU have gone and gotten their own health record completely separate from Lorenzo, because they were so frustrated with it, and it's actually quite nice for extracting data from. So I think my main question for myself and more for the Papworth folk is, how can we get on board with Cambridge and EPIC and start syncing up between the sites, because it seems maddening to have this capacity on one site but not the other.
Well, so there's a high level conversation. So if I go back in the day, originally Papworth obviously was going to have EPIC, and then and so in fact the cardiology part of EPIC was actually configured by Papworth staff who were part of the original eHospital team. But then further down the line, I think, so I'm not an accountant and I'm not the best person to ask, but I think somewhere tied up with the cost of the building, it became apparent that Papworth couldn't afford to continue with EPIC, which is why they then went to Lorenzo. And at that time, the government was paying people to take Lorenzo, which I think also helped to smooth some of the process. So there is still, so in the same way, the Great Ormond Street are extending their instance of EPIC to cover the Royal Marsden. Royal Devon and Exeter are now going to be extending their instance of EPIC to cover North Devon, and almost certainly there will be approval soon for them to extend it to cover all of Cornwall as well. So there is still always, and there remains the opportunity, but I recognize that there are other challenges about us bringing Papworth in as was originally envisaged. Notwithstanding that, one of the projects that is going on is that there is a shared care record that is going to be deployed across the integrated care system by a company called Orion that has gone through procurement, and we're in the very early stages of implementation. And we as a hospital, Royal Papworth, the Mental Health Trust, NWAFT, so Hinchinbrook, Peterborough, community services, and all of the GP systems will be feeding data into that. And that will be going live in phases throughout next year. That will be broadly a read-only system. Chris Johnson, who is one of the respiratory consultants at Papworth, he and I have been talking about this in great detail, and Chris is sort of my equivalent with yourselves. What we have agreed is that there are different ways that each of the systems might interface with the Orion system. I have specifically aligned the approach that CUH is going to take with the same approach that Papworth needs, because the capability of Lorenzo is slightly limited in this regard, so that Orion only need to develop one set of tools that will service both us and Royal Papworth. I'm very happy to do that. It's a modern standard. It's what we should be doing anyway, but with a sort of ulterior motive that both Chris and I can use some of that work, and some of it can be repurposed for a more detailed direct CUH Royal Papworth link, so that we start to get an even richer quality of data flowing between the two hospitals in the absence of Papworth using Epic, and over and above what will be delivered into the shared care record. Because I think the reality is, again, the mutual benefit to both hospitals of having that more detailed information is really very obvious. So it is, it's work in progress. Again, neither we nor Royal Papworth have as many resources as we'd like to put on this, but there is, these conversations are ongoing, have been ongoing, and we do have a plan that is consistent and I think deliverable, and incrementally will bring us collective benefits.
Yeah, fantastic. Can I move on to another topic, which is kind of one very close to our hearts at the moment, which is AI.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the, as you know, Evis and I are both heavily involved, as is Jonathan, on AI projects, and often they're on-prem, so we'll bring a laptop in, connect it in, obviously with permission, and look at anonymized data and things. But moving forward, the companies seem to prefer often a cloud solution. Mm-hmm. And the NHS has approved different cloud providers, so they've approved AWS, they've approved Microsoft Azure, they've now approved Google Cloud Platform. Mm-hmm. GCP, I think, is also on the list now, which is fantastic. And you touched on this issue of bandwidth. Mm-hmm. So there was a project we were going to a few years ago, which was taking the mammograms that we do in our mobile vans, which aren't big volume in itself, but we do about 100 a day in each of the vans, and put them up to cloud for processing and then bring them back down to the hospital. But we didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So I'm delighted to hear that we've really upped the bandwidth.
Yes. So I unilaterally.
Does that mean we can genuinely upload all the images we take every day to a cloud for processing and then bring back down again? Is there sufficient for that?
So a lot will depend on, it will depend on number of images, what their exact size is, how quickly you want to upload them. And in part, we would need to do some testing on the segments of the network that the images are routing over.
Yeah.
But in broad terms, because we've been having this conversation with Rebecca Brace in pathology, because they're entering into a digital pathology approach, and a similar sort of thing, again, for breast cancer with Elena. So as you can imagine, obviously, the bulk of the activity happens during the daytime. So if things are not time critical, we would prefer to do them overnight, because we can give you pretty much unlimited capacity overnight. If they happen to be in the daytime, then depending on where they're acquired in the hospital and the route from there to the outside world, we can protect an element of bandwidth, A, so that you have reproducible and consistent data speeds, and B, so that we're also protecting the rest of the network. What it did do, though, last spring was, as COVID struck, was, in essence, I took the opportunity to multiply the bandwidth tenfold, because actually there's no point in sort of, 2 or 3-fold sounds like quite a lot, but actually let's just buy tenfold. We've got that funded for X many years.
Well done.
We should be able to accommodate everything that you need. But each time we just need to do some testing to make sure we're not going to compromise anything else. But there is tons and tons of capacity. At the moment, if you imagine my 10 units of bandwidth, at the peak time during the day, we're using no more than about 1.6. So there's lots of space left.
Oh, that's great.
There's
Yeah.
lots of capacity.
So
But it just needs a bit of setting up.
yeah, no, that's extremely good news. So to come to, can I kind of quiz you on like and other people, if other people want to come in, just please interrupt me. Can I quiz you on a particular AI problem that we're kind of don't seem to be resolving, and I don't know why. So in Papworth we use Jonathan, what's it called? Fractional flow reserve to estimate coronary artery functional narrowing, and images are basically beamed to the US from Papworth. Somebody does something semi-manually or semi-automatically, and the result is brought back. But we don't seem to be able to implement it in Addenbrooke's, and I just wondered what. I mean, I don't mean to put you on the. I feel like a Radio 4
No. Is that the heart flow thing?
Yeah, the heart flow.
Yeah. So
it's a good example of what is it that we're doing wrong in terms of our communication with you. Or...
No, you're not doing anything wrong. So the problem, this is just a problem of volume in a sense. So I have a team of, when fully staffed, of 11 project managers in the trust. And at the moment, I think it's either 3, well, at one point 6 of them had resigned, saying that we were working them too hard. And we've now managed to recruit a few more. So we're gradually refilling the pool. At the same time, I have over 180 requests, the same size as or bigger than heart flow to do, of which over 90 of them are rated as priority 1, with 5 or 6 project managers at the moment. And associated with that are the resources that we sometimes need from Telefonica or whoever, and they're sized to meet the scale of the work that the trust said it wanted to do. So there is a queue of work that, frankly, if I had no more requests, would take me all of next year and probably all of the year beyond to get completed. And every week, there are somewhere between 2 and 8 new requests of a similar size. And anything that's related to COVID gets done first. Anything that's related to patient safety gets done first. There's a ton of kit out there that is being replaced because it was old. And what it means is that things like heart flow that we ought to be doing, they just never bubble up to the top of the list. One of the conversations that I've had with finance, and I'm still trying to pursue, is there's always a need across multiple departments, either for project managers or for some other support in order to get some of these projects up and running. And if we had a more transparent process but equally, and I know in radiology, you are funding Chris Levitt as a project manager, and actually Chris helps a lot because he does do a lot of the work that otherwise, unfortunately, you'd be even further down the queue than you are at present. But there is a piece of work that says, there's a predictable level of work in the hospital every year. Why don't we as a hospital choose to fund, I don't know, say 15 project managers? And then as teams come and go and say, I need somebody to help me do this work, I can in effect resell part of their time for a defined period of time for that project, because you don't want to have a whole load of people hanging around most of the time doing nothing. And I'd always have something to keep them busy. And then that way we sort of break even. But there are challenges. So the real problem is there just isn't enough resource in the trust to deliver the scale of the work that the trust says that it wants to do. And this has been discussed at performance committee and with the executive to say, how do we better align requests, if you like, supply and demand, for want of a better phrase.
So Afzal, the NHSX did a very smart thing, I thought, recently, which was advertise for PhD students to come and be seconded. And in fact, one of my students is going to go on secondment, which will be super interesting. It'll be a great experience for her. Now, I've been inundated with medical students wanting to come and do AI or AI-related projects. It is actually a really important area for medical students to be involved in terms of understanding how we record hospital data, how we use it, how we take it forward. And so I think one potentially untapped resource that could usefully be used by your team are medical student projects, where they could come and do, 3 months with you. You could even give them short internships and pay them, I reckon relatively small amounts, but they are an amazing resource. I've been so impressed, when they come and work with us, so we give them tasks to do, and then suddenly, a week later, they hand you something and they think, oh my goodness, it's done, wow. And that could be and I don't know whether you've explored that, but certainly we'd be very happy to work with you. In terms of, obviously there's quite a bit of supervision, but, in terms of, if there were specific areas and things, then I think that is a workforce that we could really usefully use. And there'll be other student groups across the university, again, who I'm sure could have amazingly useful experience and on their CVs, for you, very high-end people. Anyway.
No, well, we're exploring a number of things. And in fact, so medical students is one that we're keen to explore. We're already looking at some more apprenticeship type schemes to try and bring some people in. There are conversations going on with via Gareth Thomas with the sort of health education England around getting some either foundation trainee or intermediate level trainee type rotations as well, which will include a slot with us. And you're absolutely right. We need to be baking this in right from medical student level all the way through, so that the next cohort of people who are doing my job didn't grow up with a ZX80. They grew up with something that was a little bit more, shall we say, regularized.
Yeah, but certainly, and like all the public health doctor, there's a whole lot of different scheme, registrar training who would benefit from really some in-depth knowledge of the thing. Afzal, listen, thank you so much. I found that absolutely fascinating, extremely useful to hear what's going on. And please let us help wherever we can.
Sure.
And we just so value, as Eva said, we so value your contribution to the hospital and the workings of the hospital. You've kept us well in the forefront as far as IT is concerned. So thank you so much, and congratulations on all the work that you've been doing.
Thank you very much. And really just to add, you know where I am. If you need stuff,